Hello everybody. We're going to be painting cylinders. I'm going to show you how to paint them in vertical and horizontal positions. And I'm going to start with the gesture, which we'll do in black and white. I'm going to use a warm black and a cool black, which I mixed beforehand. I'll be mixing with a little bit of white and some thinner also. And in the gesture, I like to divide the canvas into fourths, get an idea of where I want to put the top and the bottom of my vertical cylinder. Now I'm putting in the edges of the cylinder laying down, and I want to get just kind of get the angle of both of those edges and locate how a line down the middle, which I call the central axis of the object. Then I begin to put the cylinder ellipses back in the cylinder in the background. Draw right through the bottom of that cylinder. Now the axis line, or the line going down, that's the axis line of the object, is so that I can determine the angle of the ellipse that I'm drawing on the object laying down. The long axis of the ellipse should be perpendicular to that line, 90 degrees. So that's why I put that line in there. I'm also locating the location of the cast shadow. It's coming off. This is all just very preliminary gesture right now, just getting my dimensions of the object itself. Okay, now I'm beginning to just perfect those ellipses a little bit more. Okay, continue to draw right through the object on that back ellipse, and on the object behind it, I'm just straightening that up a little bit too. And locating the cast shadows of both objects. And I'm going to clean it up a little bit now that I got some of my basic gesture in. Just clean up some of the edges, take a little bit of white and tighten it up a little bit. I'm putting in a light value on the back of that particular cylinder. I'm also eliminating part of the ellipse in the back that you won't see. Okay, tightening up, continuing to tighten up, putting in just a little bit of light before I really start to block this in. And cleaning it up, adjusting my size and dimension. Cleaning up this ellipse a little bit as well on the back cylinder. Okay, now I'm beginning to just block in a little bit of the cast shadow, just locating it in basic value, putting it in slightly before I actually start to block in. And I'm darkening some of the edges on the back cylinder before I start and actually put the background in. I'm going to also locate my core shadow on both cylinders, which I did earlier, which I did on the one in the back. Here's the core shadow for the one in the front. That's where that's going to go. And I'm going to block in a little bit of the cast shadow down here too before I get started. Okay, this is still all part of the gesture. Getting it ready to block in. Cleaning it up a little bit extra. Okay, now I'm beginning to get ready to block this in, and I'm kind of fine-tuning this back ellipse, and the dark I'm putting in is actually going to be in the background. Okay, getting that shadow in too. I've got a little bit of value on the background now, and I'm beginning to get more precise the cast shadow. Okay, get that in there. Now that dark part in the back will be part of that back ellipse, part of it. Okay, and I'm locating the bottom of the ellipse on the cylinder in the back that's vertical. I'm putting in a little bit more light now, and I'm getting a little bit more value in my painting. The lighting's a little funky right here because it got a little overexposed as I was filming. Okay, I'm darkening that cast shadow, softening the edges, and putting in the core shadow a little bit deeper, softening as I go a little bit. Okay, and putting a little more reflected light back into the ellipse, and also increasing the contrast of the dark edge. Okay, softening my edges as I go, always readjusting each edge. You don't want to fall in love with your brush strokes yet. Putting a little more light in, and increasing my contrast with darks just to get that light blended in. Working on that dark edge and softening the edge, tweaking it a little bit, and softening that edge. Okay, darkening that. Continuing to refine, just beginning to refine more. Okay. This looks pretty good at this point. There's a little bit more reflected light. And I'm going to increase the light right up against the object to increase the contrast, make it a little bit greater contrast right here. And some reflected light in the cast shadow. Soften some of these edges as I go. Now I'm tweaking that edge right there on the back of the bottom of the lips. Okay. And continuing to add my light, put my highlights in, and soften each stroke as I go. And as I'm going, I want to change directions a little bit with my strokes. Okay, I don't have my brightest light in yet because I saved that for maybe the highlight toward the final phase. And keep increasing the contrast. Okay, I'm putting more contrast into the background and fine-tuning this back ellipse on the object. Always stating and restating some of these edges. Sometimes I'll bring that background right to the edge, actually touch and overlap that edge slightly before I blend it. And here I'm getting ready to blend it a little bit. Switch brush, and I'm going to blend. I'm going to part way over the object, part way in the background, and just give it a slight blend. There it is. And I'm going to put some more dark into this edge to get more contrast. But I've already blended the edge once. So now we'll continue with the object and restate my core shadow, get a little bit deeper in my values, a little darker on the object in the background, creating more contrast. So this front object will begin to pop more now that I've increased the contrast slightly. I'll come back a little later and we'll increase probably the reflected light in some spots. Okay, continuing to tighten it up a little bit as I go. Okay, this is really the beginning of early refinement as I'm refining the edge one more time. And you'll see it goes into the shadow, and those are things you'll just keep refining as you continue to work on your painting. Starting to put a little more reflected light into the cast shadow, and a little more light also on the top of the object a little bit, top of the back cylinder. Now I'm going to darken that edge as well, so like give more contrast, but I wanted to get a little bit of light in it. I'm just kind of smoothing out the background, working in hyper speed, chipmunk speed. It gives you a little bit of an idea, though. It's still you're going to blend as you go. You don't necessarily need to blend the whole stroke. You might want to leave part of the stroke, just blend edges of it or parts of it lightly. Okay, and I'm fixing the bottom of this ellipse a little bit. It's still just a little off. Now I'm getting it a little bit closer to what it should be. Putting a little more reflected light back into the shadow, working on the edges. And I'm going to continue. We're in the early refinement phase of this. Okay. I'm going to continue to blend. Actually, I'm putting in more light into the bottom cylinder now. This would be a highlight area. It's not a hard highlight. Those I usually save for the final phase. I'm going to blend this out a little bit so I'm getting closer to the value that I want for the object. Here I'm just lightly pulling that into the slightly grayer value below and then back up into the light barely. You'll see that I leave some light in there. Okay, small edges. I don't want to necessarily go over the whole thing all the time, but I will switch direction, just smooth it out a little bit. Putting a little more value in the back. And you see it's getting considerably lighter in the back. And as we grow and blend, it will begin to blend out a little bit more. I'm putting some light on the back edge, blending it, and working on the contrast of on the front of this bottom cylinder, front ellipse. Okay, getting some reflected light in the very, very bottom up against the darkest part of that shadow. Reflected light right in there. You can see this is real speed here. Okay, back to chipmunk speed. Okay, looks good. And as you're blending, you can go to a softer brush, a dry brush with nothing on it, something with squirrel hair or ox hair. Now I'm putting in some of the light, just making some gentle taps just to get it to blend. I'm beginning to get close to the more refinement phase. That's where the whole time I'll be adjusting and readjusting edges, fine-tuning it, getting them more exact each time. And since I'm working wet into wet, you just have to take your time and keep coming back to it. Sometimes you can just let it dry before you start the next phase if you're happy with it. Okay, and I'm taking a very, very small blending brush just to get that edge back to where it looks like it's turning and going back into the background. Okay, again, tweaking, just lightly adjusting these edges. These are the tight spots where the shadows and the bottoms of objects are all in the same area, and so it can be real tight. Just take your time with it. And I'm cleaning up some of these cast shadows, some of the edges. This back edge here will be softer when I'm done than the part that's closest to the object. As the cast shadow gets further from the object that's blocking the light, it'll get softer. Okay, putting a little bit of light back into the background. This is going to take a little while because it's very tight down here. Cleaning up this edge. Okay, a little harder down here. Okay, I'm just blending, softening some edges, not all of them, but some. Okay, putting a little more light in, getting a little bit more exact with my edges, even the back of the, in this case, the back of a table that these objects are on. Okay, blend some of it, don't have to blend all of it. Okay, I'm doing blend, this is hyper speed for blending. Okay, just soft blends, soft strokes. Change directions when you're blending. Okay, now I'm entering the final phase. As I go into the final phase, I'm just going to tweak things. I'm going to make last minute adjustments. I'm going to put reflected light in, and now I'm going to put in maybe even a small hard highlight here. This is about the only spot I have one, right at the bottom of this lid that goes on this bottom cylinder. I got a little bit of a hard highlight. So I'm putting that in just carefully and slowly, resting my hand on my other hand, just because it's a tight little highlight. Okay, putting some more reflected light back in also, right under the lid, right in here, and adjusting that cast shadow coming off the bottom of that lid. Okay, and sometimes you can go back into part of that light. You don't want to go over the middle part of that highlight, otherwise you'll lose it and it'll get too washed out. A few little places. That's my little blending brush, teeny itty bitty one. So when I'm doing tight areas, I like to have a little tiny brush for that. Just get it adjusted, get it soft. Okay, and fine tune some of these edges. Just the softness on my core shadow. I don't want that to be too hard. Okay, and put a little more reflected light back in here, that side. Continuing to blend, add a little more reflected light in the cast shadow. Change directions as I'm blending some of these. Don't want to blend every edge. Start to put some more background into more lights and darks in the background. Now I want to put some of my strokes in and leave some strokes so I can see them. I like that a little expressive quality of the brush stroke. In order to do that, I just don't necessarily want to blend every stroke completely out. Change directions when you're putting those in. In some cases, go right over the object or even over a shadow partially, and then you can blend it back out. I don't want to have hard edges on that cast shadow, especially toward the back of the shadow as it gets away from the object. Okay, and in some cases I'll just drag a little bit of the color over another edge and let it, or another portion and let it show up through it. And I'm going to go to the core shadow and soften that edge some more. Back to just moving all around the canvas, tightening up some of the values, some of the edges here and there, softening some. In this case, I might even bring a little bit of background over the edge and soften it just to make sure it's merging with the background. A little bit of light, a little bit of reflected light in a portion of the object. Blend portion of it out, not necessarily the whole thing, just part of it. Soften these edges. I'm using my little itty bitty blending brush for some of the fine blending. I've pretty much tweaked most of the shapes of everything to where I want it. Now it's a matter of just getting it tight. Put some more reflected light back into the background also on the shadow side of that cylinder. Soften that. Continue to fine-tune this. This is tricky because it's wet and it's easy to go beyond that. Okay, I'm finished.